The sun blazed mercilessly over Memphis as Darius stepped off the wooden barge that had carried him down the Nile for 7 days. The great capital of Egypt stretched before him like a vision from the gods themselves, with towering temples piercing the sky and the magnificent palace of the pharaoh gleaming white and gold in the distance. His simple linen tunic and leather sandals marked him as a commoner, but the scroll case slung across his shoulder carried the seal that would change his life forever. Darius had been chosen from among hundreds of young men in his village to serve as a scribe in the temple of Ra, the most prestigious position a man of his humble birth could ever hope to achieve. The high priest who had visited his village months ago had seen something in the careful way Darius formed his hieroglyphs, in the reverent manner he handled the sacred texts. Now, at 22 years old, he was about to enter a world he had only dreamed of. The palace compound where he would live was a maze of interconnected buildings, courtyards filled with lotus pools, and corridors lined with painted walls depicting the glory of the gods. As Darius followed a silent servant through the complex, he breathed in the heavy scent of frankincense and myrrh that seemed to permeate every stone. The air itself felt different here, charged with an energy that made his skin tingle and his heart race. His quarters were modest but clean, a small chamber with a narrow bed, a wooden chest, and a window that looked out onto a garden where priests moved in slow, ritualistic patterns. As he unpacked his few belongings, Darius heard raised voices from the courtyard below. Curiosity drew him to the window, where he saw 2 guards facing each other with obvious tension. The first was tall and lean, with the distinctive shaved head and kohl-lined eyes of the palace guard. His name, Darius would later learn, was Asatef, and he carried himself with the arrogance of someone accustomed to getting his way. The second guard was broader, more solidly built, with intricate tattoos covering his arms and a quieter, more dangerous presence. This was Cayman, and even from a distance, Darius could sense the barely contained power in his stance. They were arguing in low, heated tones about something Darius couldn't quite make out, but their body language spoke of a competition that went far deeper than mere professional rivalry. Both men kept glancing toward the temple complex, as if whatever they were fighting over could be found there. "You're new." The voice behind him made Darius jump and spin around. An older man stood in the doorway, wearing the simple robes of a temple administrator. His hair was gray at the temples, and his eyes held the wisdom of someone who had spent decades navigating the complex politics of the palace. "I am Keshu, overseer of the scribes. You must be Darius." "Yes, sir," Darius replied, bowing respectfully. "I'm honored to serve." Keshu studied him for a long moment, his gaze lingering on Darius's face and form in a way that made the young man feel oddly exposed. "The palace can be overwhelming for someone of your background," Keshu said carefully. "There are customs here, ancient ways that must be respected. Some men find the atmosphere here affects them in unexpected ways." From a pouch at his belt, Keshu produced a small collection of amulets carved from blue faience and strung on leather cords. "These are protective charms," he explained, placing them in Darius's hands. "They will help shield you from unwanted influences. I suggest you wear them at all times, especially during the evening hours when the temple ceremonies are performed." Darius examined the amulets, recognizing some of the hieroglyphs but puzzled by their combination. There were symbols for protection, binding, and concealment, arranged in patterns he had never seen before. "What kind of influences, sir?" "The kind that could complicate your service here," Keshu replied cryptically. "Trust me, young scribe, the palace has ways of awakening things in men that are better left dormant." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Your first duty begins at dawn in the archive chamber. Do not be late, and do not remove those amulets." That night, Darius lay on his narrow bed listening to the sounds of the palace settling into evening. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the rhythmic chanting of priests performing the night rituals, the sound carrying on the warm air through his window. The amulets Keshu had given him felt heavy against his chest, their smooth surfaces warm against his skin. He had expected to feel homesick, to miss the simple life of his village, but instead he found himself oddly energized by this new environment. There was something in the air here, something that made his blood run faster and his senses feel heightened. When he finally drifted off to sleep, his dreams were filled with golden light and the sound of his own name being called by a voice he didn't recognize. The archive chamber of the Temple of Ra was a vast hall lined floor to ceiling with papyrus scrolls, stone tablets, and wooden boxes containing the accumulated wisdom of centuries. Darius arrived at dawn as instructed and found himself assigned to a section devoted to astronomical observations and religious calendar calculations. The work was exactly what he had hoped for, challenging and meaningful, requiring both his scribal skills and his growing understanding of the complex Egyptian religious system. For his first week, Darius threw himself into his duties, cataloging scrolls and copying important texts with meticulous care. He spoke little to his fellow scribes, most of whom were older and seemed to regard him with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. It wasn't until his second week that he began to understand why. He was working late one evening, the archive chamber lit only by oil lamps, when he became aware of being watched. Looking up from his papyrus, he saw a figure standing in the shadows between the tall shelves. The man stepped forward into the lamplight, and Darius's breath caught in his throat. He was perhaps 30 years old, with the lean, elegant build of the nobility. His skin was the warm bronze of someone who spent time in the sun, and his dark hair was longer than the fashion for most palace dwellers, curling slightly at his neck. But it was his eyes that held Darius captive, deep brown, almost black, with an intensity that seemed to look straight through to his soul. "You are the new scribe," the man said, his voice low and melodious. Unlike most of the palace inhabitants, he didn't speak to Darius with the dismissive tone reserved for commoners. "I am Juluz. I serve the high priest in matters of ritual interpretation." Darius set down his reed pen and bowed. "I am honored to meet you, sir." Juluz moved closer, circling Darius's work table like a predator studying its prey. "You have been here 2 weeks now. How do you find palace life?" "Fascinating, sir. The archive contains wonders I never dreamed of seeing." "Indeed, but I suspect the archive is not the only thing you find stimulating about your new environment." Juluz's eyes seemed to glow in the lamplight. "Tell me, young Darius, have you noticed any changes in yourself since arriving here? Any new sensations, unexpected reactions to the people around you?" The question made Darius's cheeks burn. He had noticed changes, subtle but unmistakable. Certain scents seemed more intense now, particularly the frankincense used in the temple ceremonies and the exotic oils some of the palace inhabitants wore. He found himself acutely aware of the movements and voices of the men around him in ways that had never occurred to him before. And there were dreams, vivid and disturbing, that left him waking with his heart pounding and his body responding in ways he didn't fully understand. "I'm not sure what you mean, sir," he said carefully. Juluz smiled, and there was something both knowing and predatory in the expression. "Of course you don't. You are untrained, unguided. But the signs are there for those who know how to read them." He reached out and touched the amulets at Darius's throat, his fingers brushing the young man's skin. "Protection charms. Keshu gave these to you, didn't he? Wise of him, though perhaps not as effective as he hopes." The touch sent a shock through Darius that had nothing to do with fear. His skin tingled where Juluz's fingers had made contact, and he found himself leaning slightly into the touch before catching himself and stepping back. "What are you talking about?" Darius demanded, his voice shakier than he intended. "You are not what you appear to be, young scribe. Your essence, your very soul, carries the mark of something rare and precious. You are what we call a late-blooming lotus, one whose true nature remains hidden until the proper environment awakens it." Juluz's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "You are Omega, Darius. Your spirit carries the divine feminine principle, the receptive power that complements and completes the masculine force." The words hit Darius like a physical blow. In his village, such things were spoken of only in whispers, if at all. The ancient Egyptian understanding of spiritual gender was far more complex than the simple male-female divisions recognized by other cultures. They spoke of Alpha and Omega as complementary spiritual forces that could manifest in either men or women, creating bonds that transcended physical form. That's impossible, Darius said. But even as he spoke the words, something deep inside him recognized their truth. I'm just a scribe. I'm nobody special. On the contrary, you are quite special indeed, and dangerous in your untrained state. Do you not wonder why the guards Asatef and Cayman have been circling you like vultures? Why Keshu felt the need to give you protective amulets? Why I myself am drawn to seek you out in the depths of the night? Darius's mind reeled. He had noticed the attention from the guards, the way they seemed to appear wherever he went, but he had attributed it to normal palace security. Now Juluz was suggesting something far more significant. What does this mean for me? He asked. It means you must be very careful. The palace is full of alpha souls who would see you as a prize to be claimed, a source of power to be harnessed. Without proper training and protection, you could find yourself bound to someone who would use you rather than cherish you. Juluz stepped back, his expression becoming more formal. I will speak to the high priest about arranging proper instruction for you. In the meantime, trust no one completely, and do not allow yourself to be alone with any of the alpha spirits you encounter here. After Juluz left, Darius sat in the flickering lamplight trying to process what he had learned. The very foundations of his understanding of himself had been shaken. If what the priest said was true, then everything about his presence in the palace took on new meaning. He was not just a scribe seeking advancement. He was a rare and valuable soul navigating a world of predators. Over the following days, Darius found himself viewing his surroundings with new eyes. The glances he received from other palace inhabitants, the way conversations stopped when he entered a room, the careful distance maintained by some while others seemed drawn to get closer. It all made sense now in a disturbing way. But it was 3 nights later that his world truly changed forever. He was returning from evening prayers at the temple when he took a wrong turn in one of the palace's maze-like corridors. The passage he found himself in was dimly lit and unfamiliar, lined with alcoves containing statues of ancient gods. As he tried to retrace his steps, he heard footsteps behind him. Turning, he saw Asatef approaching with 2 other guards he didn't recognize. The tall man's usual arrogant expression had been replaced by something far more predatory, and Darius felt his heart begin to race. Lost, little scribe? Asatef asked, his voice carrying a mocking tone. These corridors can be confusing for someone new to the palace. I can find my way, Darius replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Thank you for your concern. He turned to leave, but one of the other guards stepped into his path. No need to hurry off, the man said with an unpleasant smile. We're just being friendly. Don't you want to make friends with the palace guard? Darius's training in palace protocol had not prepared him for this situation. These men clearly had authority over him, but their intentions were becoming increasingly clear and increasingly unwelcome. He looked around for an escape route, but the corridor was narrow and they had effectively trapped him. I should return to my quarters, he said, trying to project more confidence than he felt. I have early duties tomorrow. Your duties can wait, Asatef said, moving closer. You've been here for weeks now, but you've kept to yourself. That's not very sociable. We think it's time you learned more about how things work in the palace. The other guards moved to flank him, and Darius realized with growing alarm that his protective amulets seemed to be having no effect whatsoever. If anything, the men seemed more aggressive than before, as if his presence was exciting them rather than deterring them. Please, he said, backing against the wall. I don't want any trouble. No trouble, Asatef assured him, reaching out to touch Darius's face. Just a friendly conversation. Maybe we can teach you some things that aren't in your precious scrolls. The touch of the guard's hand on his skin sent a wave of revulsion through Darius, but also something else, a strange, unwelcome heat that seemed to spread from the point of contact. His body was betraying him, responding to the alpha presence in ways he couldn't control. The realization terrified him more than the physical threat. Just as Asatef leaned closer, his intentions becoming unmistakable, a new voice cut through the tension like a blade. Step away from him. The guard spun around, and Darius saw a figure standing at the end of the corridor. The man was tall and powerfully built, wearing the distinctive armor of the Pharaoh's personal guard. Even in the dim light, there was something about his presence that commanded immediate attention and respect. "Nebu," Asatef said, and Darius could hear the frustration and anger in his voice. "This is none of your concern. The safety of all palace inhabitants is my concern," the newcomer replied, moving closer with the fluid grace of a trained warrior. "And I'm certain the three of you have other duties to attend to." The tension in the corridor was palpable as the guards weighed their options. Nebu was clearly not someone to be challenged lightly, but their interest in Darius was strong enough that they were reluctant to simply walk away. "We were just welcoming the new scribe," one of the other guards said with false innocence, "making sure he feels at home." "I'm sure your intentions were entirely honorable," Nebu said, his tone making it clear he believed nothing of the sort. "However, I'm certain you can find other ways to demonstrate palace hospitality. Ways that don't involve cornering unarmed civilians in dark corridors." The standoff continued for several tense moments before Asatef finally stepped back with obvious reluctance. "Of course," he said through gritted teeth. "We wouldn't want to interfere with your duties, Nebu." As the three guards retreated down the corridor, Nebu turned his attention to Darius. In the better light, the young scribe could see that his rescuer was perhaps 28 or 30 years old, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. His features were strong and regular, with intelligent dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Are you hurt?" Nebu asked, his voice gentler now than it had been when addressing the guards. "No," Darius replied, though his voice was still shaky. "Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't arrived." "I think we both know what would have happened," Nebu said grimly. "This is not the first time those three have targeted new arrivals. Unfortunately, their behavior falls into a gray area that makes formal complaints difficult to pursue." He studied Darius carefully, and the young scribe felt himself being evaluated in a way that was thorough but not threatening. "You are the new scribe, the one assigned to the RA archive. I am Nebu, captain of the Pharaoh's personal guard." The introduction carried weight that Darius immediately recognized. The Pharaoh's personal guard was an elite unit, their loyalty absolute and their authority considerable. That such a man had chosen to intervene on his behalf was both gratifying and puzzling. "Why did you help me?" Darius asked. Nebu was quiet for a moment, as if considering how much to reveal. "Let's just say that I have been keeping an eye on you since your arrival. There are those in the palace who would take advantage of your unique nature. I prefer to see that such advantages are not taken." The words confirmed what Juluz had told him about his Omega status, but they also raised new questions. How many people in the palace were aware of his true nature? And why would the captain of the Pharaoh's guard concern himself with protecting a lowly scribe? "I should escort you back to your quarters," Nebu said. "The palace can be dangerous for the unwary, especially during the evening hours." As they walked through the corridors, Darius found himself acutely aware of Nebu's presence beside him. The guard captain moved with quiet confidence, his hand resting casually on the hilt of his sword, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. But there was something else, something that made Darius's skin tingle and his breath catch. Unlike the aggressive, predatory energy he had sensed from Asatef and the other guards, Nebu's presence felt protective and stable. Yet underneath that stability was a power that made Darius's newly awakened Omega instincts respond in ways he was still learning to understand. "The protective amulets Keshu gave you," Nebu said as they reached Darius's quarters. "They're not working as intended, are they?" Darius touched the charms at his throat, remembering how useless they had proven during the encounter with the guards. "How did you know?" "Because if they were effective, tonight's incident would never have occurred. Your scent, your energy, it's too strong to be completely masked by simple protection charms." Nebu paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "You need better protection than amulets can provide." "What kind of protection?" "The kind that can only come from a bonded alpha," Nebu said quietly. "Someone whose presence would make it clear to others that you are not available for claiming." The suggestion sent a shock through Darius that was part fear, part excitement, and part something he couldn't name. The idea of bonding with an alpha was something he had never seriously considered, belonging as it did to a world far above his social station. Yet here was Nebu, clearly alpha himself, discussing it as if it were a practical necessity. "I don't understand," Darius said. "Why would you care what happens to me? You don't even know me." Nebu turned to face him fully, and in the lamplight from the corridor, his expression was intense and serious. 3 weeks ago, I was performing my evening security rounds when I caught a scent unlike anything I had ever encountered. It led me to the temple complex where I saw you for the first time working late in the archive chamber. Since that moment, I have not been able to get you out of my thoughts. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that Darius was only beginning to grasp. "You've been watching me. Protecting you," Nebu corrected. "There is a difference. You are untrained, unguided, broadcasting your nature to every alpha in the palace. Without someone to shield you, incidents like tonight's will only become more frequent and more dangerous." Darius felt overwhelmed by the rapid changes in his life and his understanding of himself. A month ago, he had been a simple village scribe with modest ambitions. Now he was apparently a rare and coveted Omega soul, the subject of political intrigue and the object of protection by one of the most powerful men in the palace. "I need time to think," he said. "Of course," Nebu replied. "But while you're thinking, remember that time may not be a luxury you can afford indefinitely. There are others who have noticed you, others who will not be as patient or as honorable in their intentions." That night, Darius lay awake staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of everything that had happened. His body still carried the memory of Nebu's presence, the way his scent, a mixture of leather, steel, and something indefinably masculine, had made him feel both safe and excited. But accepting protection from such a man would mean accepting a fundamental change in his identity and his future. The next few days passed in a strange suspension of normalcy. Darius continued his work in the archive, but he was constantly aware of being watched, evaluated, discussed. Julus appeared periodically to check on his progress and to provide subtle guidance about managing his emerging nature. Keshu seemed nervous and distracted, often starting conversations only to trail off and hurry away. And through it all, Darius caught glimpses of Nebu, a shadow in a doorway, a figure on a distant balcony, a presence that made itself known without being intrusive. It was during the evening of the 5th day that the situation came to a head. Darius was leaving the temple after evening prayers when he was approached by Cayman, the broad-shouldered guard he had first seen arguing with Asatef. Unlike his rival, Cayman's approach was more subtle, but no less determined. "Scribe Darius," he said with a respectful bow. "Might I have a word with you?" Against his better judgment, Darius nodded. Cayman had not been involved in the corridor incident, and his manner seemed genuinely respectful rather than predatory. "I want to make you an offer," Cayman said without preamble. "I know what you are and I know the position you're in. You need protection, guidance, someone to help you navigate the complexities of palace life. I can provide all of that." "In exchange for what?" Darius asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Your bond, your loyalty, your companionship." Cayman's eyes were intense but not threatening. "I'm not like Asatef and his friends. I wouldn't force you or abuse you. But I am Alpha, and you are Omega, and together we could be strong." The proposal was more honorable than what he had faced from Asatef, but it still felt like being asked to trade his freedom for security. "And if I refuse? Then you continue as you are, vulnerable and unprotected, until someone less honorable than myself decides to claim you with or without your consent." It was a stark assessment, but Darius suspected it was accurate. The palace was proving to be a far more dangerous place than he had anticipated, and his options seemed to be narrowing rapidly. "I need time to consider your offer," he said. "Of course, but don't take too long. Events have a way of forcing decisions when we least expect them." That night, Darius found himself unable to concentrate on his evening reading. He wandered onto the small balcony attached to his chamber and stood looking out over the palace complex, watching the play of lamplight and shadow across the ancient stones. "Troubled thoughts?" a familiar voice asked from the darkness. Darius turned to see Nebu stepping out of the shadows at the edge of the balcony. The guard captain moved with such quiet grace that his approach had been completely silent. "How do you do that?" Darius asked. "Years of training," Nebu replied with a slight smile. "The Pharaoh's enemies do not announce themselves with fanfare." He joined Darius at the balcony railing, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. In the moonlight, his profile was sharp and handsome, and Darius found himself studying the strong line of his jaw, the way his dark hair curled slightly at his neck. "Came and approached you today," Nebu said. "It wasn't a question. You were watching. It's my job to watch, among other motivations." Nebu turned to look at him directly. "What did you tell him?" "That I needed time to think. The same thing I told you." "And what are your thoughts leading you toward?" Darius was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with feelings and desires he was still learning to understand. "I'm afraid," he admitted finally. "Of what?" "Of losing myself. Of becoming someone else's possession instead of my own person. Of making the wrong choice and regretting it for the rest of my life." Nebu nodded slowly. "Those are reasonable fears. The bond between Alpha and Omega is not something to be entered into lightly. It changes both parties, creates connections that can't be easily broken." "Then why are you encouraging me to consider it?" "Because the alternative may be worse. You are broadcasting your nature so strongly now that every alpha in the palace is aware of you. Some, like Cayman, would treat you with respect. Others, like Asatef, would see you as a conquest. And there are those who would use you as a political tool, a way to gain influence or power." The reality of his situation was becoming clearer and more frightening. "What would you do if you were in my position?" "I would choose the alpha whose presence felt right, whose scent called to something deep in my soul, whose protection came from genuine care rather than possessive desire." Nebu's voice was quiet but intense. "I would choose the one who made me feel safe to be vulnerable, strong enough to be myself." As he spoke, Darius became acutely aware of Nebu's scent, that mixture of leather and steel and something uniquely masculine that seemed to call to every instinct he was still discovering. Without thinking, he moved closer, drawn by a force he couldn't name or resist. "Darius," Nebu said, his voice rough with something that might have been warning or desire. "I feel it," Darius whispered. "When you're near me, I feel different, calmer but also more alive. Like something inside me recognizes something inside you." Nebu's hand came up to cup his face, the touch gentle but firm. "That's your Omega soul recognizing its complement. The question is whether you're ready to accept what that recognition means." Before Darius could respond, Nebu leaned down and kissed him, soft and careful, but with an underlying intensity that made Darius's knees weak. It was nothing like the aggressive attention he had received from the other guards. This felt like coming home, like finding a piece of himself he hadn't known was missing. When they broke apart, both men were breathing hard, and the air between them seemed charged with electricity. "I want to accept," Darius said, his voice barely above a whisper, "but I'm still afraid." "Fear is natural," Nebu replied, his thumb brushing across Darius's cheekbone. "But you don't have to face it alone anymore." The formal bonding ceremony took place 3 days later in a private chapel within the Temple of Ra. Only Juluz and Keshu were present as witnesses, along with the high priest who performed the ancient ritual. The ceremony itself was beautiful and solemn, involving the exchange of sacred oils, the speaking of vows that dated back to the earliest dynasties, and the creation of spiritual bonds that would link their souls for life. As the priest anointed their foreheads with the sacred oils and spoke the final words of binding, Darius felt something fundamental shift inside him. The constant low-level anxiety that had plagued him since arriving at the palace faded away, replaced by a sense of completion and belonging that he had never experienced before. But it was that night, in the private chambers they would now share, that the true depth of their connection became clear. When Nebu touched the side of his neck in the ritual gesture of claiming, Darius felt a surge of sensation that was part physical, part spiritual, and entirely overwhelming. The bond between them snapped into place with an almost audible click, and suddenly he could feel Nebu's emotions as clearly as his own. "How is this possible?" Darius gasped, his hand going to his throat where Nebu's touch had left a mark that seemed to glow in the lamplight. "The ancient magic of the bond," Nebu replied, his own voice rough with emotion. "We are connected now in ways that go beyond the physical. I can feel your joy, your contentment, your love. And I can feel yours," Darius whispered in wonder. Through the bond, he could sense Nebu's fierce protectiveness, his deep affection, his overwhelming relief that Darius had chosen to trust him with this precious gift. The weeks that followed were a time of adjustment and discovery. Darius continued his work in the archive, but now he moved through the palace with the quiet confidence of someone under powerful protection. The aggressive attention he had received from other alphas ceased entirely. The bond mark on his neck made his status unmistakably clear. More importantly, he began to flourish in ways he had never imagined possible. The constant strain of managing his emerging Omega nature alone had been exhausting in ways he hadn't fully realized. Now, with Nebu's presence providing stability and grounding, he found himself able to focus more clearly on his work, to engage more fully with the other scribes and temple personnel, to simply be himself without fear. Their relationship deepened with each passing day. Nebu proved to be an attentive and thoughtful partner, always conscious of Darius's needs and feelings, never demanding more than he was ready to give. In return, Darius found himself opening up in ways he had never thought possible, sharing not just his body but his thoughts, his dreams, his fears, and his hopes for the future. "I want to show you something," Nebu said one evening about a month after their bonding. He led Darius through parts of the palace complex he had never seen before, up narrow staircases and along corridors that seemed designed for secrecy rather than ceremony. They emerged onto a rooftop garden that overlooked the entire city of Memphis. The Nile stretched like a silver ribbon in the moonlight, and in the distance, the Great Pyramids rose like mountains against the star-filled sky. "It's beautiful," Darius breathed, moving to the edge of the roof where a low wall provided safety without obstructing the view. "I come here when I need to think, when the pressures of court life become too much," Nebu said, joining him at the wall. "I wanted to share it with you." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, Darius leaning back against Nebu's chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing and the warmth of his body. The bond between them hummed with contentment and deep affection. "Do you ever regret it?" Darius asked quietly. "Bonding with someone so far beneath your station?" Nebu's arms tightened around him. "Never. Station and rank are human constructions. What we have transcends all of that." He pressed a kiss to the top of Darius's head. "You have brought light into my life, purpose beyond mere duty. How could I regret that?" "I love you," Darius said, the words still feeling new and precious on his tongue. "And I love you," Nebu replied, "more than I thought possible." But their happiness was not destined to go unchallenged. The palace was a place of intrigue and shifting alliances, and their bond had not gone unnoticed by those who saw everything in terms of political advantage. It was Julus who brought them the first warning, appearing at their door one evening with an expression of barely contained urgency. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. "There are rumors circulating, questions being asked about your bonding and its implications." "What kind of questions?" Nebu asked, immediately alert. "Some of the older nobles are claiming that a common-born Omega bonding with a member of the Pharaoh's guard sets a dangerous precedent. They're suggesting that it undermines the traditional social order, that it could encourage other inappropriate liaisons." Darius felt his stomach clench with familiar fear. "What does that mean for us?" "Probably nothing in the immediate term," Julus said. "But there are whispers that some faction may try to use your relationship as a way to attack Nebu's position, or even to challenge the Pharaoh's policies regarding social mobility." "Let them whisper," Nebu said grimly. "Our bond is legitimate, performed according to all proper rituals and traditions. No one can challenge that." "Perhaps not legally," Julus agreed, "but politics rarely concerns itself with legal niceties. Be careful, both of you, and be prepared for the possibility that your relationship may become the center of larger struggles." The warning proved prescient. Over the following weeks, Darius became aware of subtle changes in how he was treated by some palace inhabitants. Certain nobles who had previously ignored him now watched him with calculating eyes. Conversations stopped when he entered rooms. There were whispered discussions that ceased abruptly when he approached. More disturbing were the anonymous messages that began appearing in his quarters. Nothing directly threatening, but suggestions that he was reaching above his station, that his presence was causing problems for those who cared about him, that perhaps he would be happier returning to his village where he belonged. "They're trying to isolate you, to make you doubt yourself and our bond," Nebu said after reading the latest message. "It's a classic technique for undermining someone's confidence." "What if they're right?" Darius asked, voicing the fear that had been growing in his mind. "What if I am causing problems for you? What if staying here means hurting your career, your position?" Nebu cupped his face in both hands, forcing him to meet his eyes. "Listen to me carefully. You are not the problem. Small-minded people who can't accept change are the problem. And I would rather face whatever consequences come from our bond than spend one day without you." The crisis came to a head during the Festival of Osiris, one of the most important religious celebrations of the year. The palace was filled with visiting nobles, foreign dignitaries, and high-ranking priests from throughout Egypt. It was during the ceremonial feast that everything went wrong. Darius was serving as one of the scribes recording the formal speeches and presentations when he became aware of a disturbance at one of the high tables. A nobleman he didn't recognize was speaking loudly, his voice carrying clearly across the hall. "It is a disgrace to the ancient traditions," the man was saying. "Common-born Omegas bonding with members of the Pharaoh's personal guard, as if there were no distinctions of rank or breeding. What next? Shall we allow slaves to marry into the royal family?" The hall fell silent, all eyes turning toward the speaker and then, inevitably, toward Darius. He felt his face burn with shame and anger, but his training in court protocol held him in place. As a servant, he had no right to respond to such criticisms, no matter how personal they might be. But Nebu had no such constraints. The guard captain rose from his place at the high table, his face cold with controlled fury. "Lord Amenhotep," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent hall. "Your concerns about tradition are noted. However, I would remind you that the bond between myself and scribe Darius was performed according to all proper religious protocols, with the blessing of the high priest of Ra himself. Protocols designed for equals," Amenhotep shot back. "Not for ambitious commoners seeking to elevate themselves through seduction." The insult hung in the air like a physical blow. Darius felt the bond between himself and Nebu flare with the guard captain's rage, and for a moment he feared that violence might erupt in the sacred space of the ceremonial hall. But it was another voice that cut through the tension, a voice that commanded immediate attention and respect from everyone present. "Lord Amenhotep." The pharaoh himself had risen from his throne, and his tone was dangerously quiet. "Are you suggesting that the high priest of Ra does not understand the proper application of religious law? Are you questioning the wisdom of the gods themselves in bringing two souls together in sacred bond?" Amenhotep's face went pale as he realized the trap he had walked into. To continue his argument would be to criticize not just Darius and Nebu, but the religious authorities and potentially the pharaoh himself. "Of course not, Divine One," he stammered. "I merely meant—" "You merely meant to cause discord at a sacred feast," the pharaoh interrupted. "You meant to spread division and discontent among my people. Such behavior is not welcome at my court." The rebuke was clear and public, effectively ending any organized opposition to Darius and Nebu's bond. But the damage had been done in other ways. The public nature of the confrontation had made their relationship a matter of widespread attention and discussion. That night, as they lay together in their chambers, Darius struggled with the implications of what had happened. "Everyone knows about us now," he said quietly. "Every person in the palace, every noble and official and priest. We can never go back to being anonymous." "Would you want to?" Nebu asked, his arms tightening around him. "Would you want to hide what we have? Pretend it doesn't exist?" "No," Darius replied, and was surprised to realize he meant it. I'm proud of what we have. I'm proud to be your bonded mate. But I'm also scared of what it means for the future. The future will bring what it brings, Nebu said philosophically. All we can do is face it together. But the future brought challenges they hadn't anticipated. The public nature of their relationship had attracted attention from beyond the palace walls. Darius began receiving requests for meetings from representatives of various Omega rights groups, people who saw him as a symbol of social progress. At the same time, traditional conservative factions began using their bond as an example of moral decay and social disorder. You've become a political symbol whether you wanted to or not, Julius explained during one of his visits. The question is what you're going to do about it. What do you mean? I mean, you have a choice. You can try to fade back into anonymity, keep your head down and hope people lose interest. Or you can embrace the role you've been given and use it to make positive change. The idea of becoming a public figure was terrifying to someone who had grown up in rural obscurity. But as Darius thought about the young Omegas who might be struggling with their identity, who might benefit from seeing someone like themselves in a position of respect and security, he began to see the possibilities. What would that mean, practically speaking? Speaking engagements, perhaps. Writings on the spiritual aspects of Alpha-Omega bonding. Using your position to advocate for others who don't have your advantages. It was Nebu who made the decision easier. Whatever you choose, I'll support you, he said. But I think you underestimate your own strength and wisdom. You have insights and experiences that could help others. Why not share them? The transformation from anonymous scribe to public advocate was gradual but profound. Darius began writing treatises on the spiritual dimensions of gender and bonding, drawing on both his scholarly training and his personal experience. His work was widely circulated and discussed, bringing him into contact with philosophers, religious scholars, and social reformers from across the kingdom. More importantly, he began receiving letters from young Omegas throughout Egypt, people who had read his writings and found hope and guidance in them. The knowledge that his personal struggles could help others gave new meaning to his experience. Look at this, he said to Nebu one evening, holding up a papyrus that had arrived that day. It's from a young man in Thebes. He says reading about our bonding gave him the courage to accept his own nature instead of trying to hide it. Nebu smiled, the expression warm with pride and affection. You see, you're changing lives, making the world a better place for people like us. We're making it better, Darius corrected. I couldn't do any of this without your support, your protection, your love. Their life settled into a new rhythm, balanced between Darius's growing public role and the intimate private world they shared. They traveled occasionally, visiting other temples and cities where Darius's insights were sought. But they always returned to Memphis, to the palace that had become their true home. It was during one of these trips that they encountered a situation that would test both their bond and their commitment to helping others. They were visiting a small temple complex in the south when they met a young Omega named Katie, who was in desperate circumstances. The boy was perhaps 16, barely past his presentation, and he had been cast out by his family when his nature became apparent. He was living in the temple as a charity case, performing menial labor in exchange for food and shelter, but his situation was precarious at best. There are others like him, the local priest explained to Darius privately. Young Omegas with nowhere to go. No family support, no resources. We do what we can, but our resources are limited. What happens to them usually? The lucky ones find bonding with local alphas, though often in circumstances that are less than ideal. The unlucky ones. Well, life is hard for the unprotected. That night, Darius couldn't sleep. The image of young Katie, so vulnerable and alone, reminded him too much of his own fears when his nature had first emerged. But where he had been fortunate enough to find protection and guidance, others were not so lucky. We have to do something, he said to Nebu as they walked along the Nile in the pre-dawn darkness. What did you have in mind? A school. A place where young Omegas can go to learn about their nature, to develop skills that will help them support themselves, to find community with others like them. Nebu was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. That would be a massive undertaking. the resources required, the political complications. The Pharaoh's support of our bonding showed that he's open to progressive ideas about social change. And my writings have gained support from influential people throughout the kingdom. Maybe it's time to ask for more than just tolerance. The conversation that followed was long and complex, covering everything from funding and location to curriculum and staffing. But by the time the sun rose over the Nile, they had the outline of a plan that could change the lives of countless young Omegas throughout Egypt. The School for Omega Development, as it came to be known, took 3 years to establish. The process involved endless meetings with officials, nobles, and religious authorities. There were setbacks and compromises, political battles and bureaucratic obstacles. But gradually, with the support of the Pharaoh and a growing network of allies, the vision became reality. The school was built on the outskirts of Memphis, close enough to the capital for resources and protection but far enough away to provide a peaceful environment for learning. The curriculum combined practical skills like writing, mathematics, and administration with more specialized training in areas like temple service, diplomatic protocols, and household management. But the most important aspect of the school was its focus on helping young Omegas understand and embrace their nature with confidence and pride. Too many had grown up feeling ashamed or afraid of what they were. The school aimed to change that, to create a generation of Omegas who could take their place in society as equals rather than hiding in the shadows. "This is remarkable," Nebu said as they walked through the completed facility on the day before its official opening. "Look what you've built." "What we've built," Darius corrected automatically, but his attention was focused on the young men and women who would be the school's first students. They had arrived over the past week, some sent by families who wanted better opportunities for their children, others refugees from less understanding situations. Among them was Katie, now 19 and one of the older students. He had grown into a confident young man under the guidance and protection Darius and Nebu had provided, and he would serve as an example to the others of what was possible. "Are you nervous?" Nebu asked as they returned to their quarters that evening. "Terrified," Darius admitted. "What if it doesn't work? What if we can't help them the way we hope to? What if we've promised more than we can deliver?" Nebu pulled him close, their bond humming with comfort and reassurance. "Then we'll learn from our mistakes and do better. But I have faith in you, in us, in what we're trying to accomplish here." The opening ceremony was attended by officials from throughout the kingdom, including the Pharaoh himself. In his speech, Darius spoke about the importance of recognizing and nurturing all forms of human potential, of creating a society where everyone could contribute their unique gifts. "The strength of Egypt has always come from the diversity of its people," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. "By giving all our citizens the tools they need to succeed, we make our entire kingdom stronger." The years that followed were busy and fulfilling in ways Darius had never imagined possible. The school grew and prospered, producing graduates who went on to distinguished careers in temple service, government administration, and noble households. More importantly, it created a network of support and community for Omegas throughout Egypt, reducing the isolation and vulnerability that had plagued so many. Darius's writings continued to gain influence, and he became recognized as one of the leading voices on matters of social progress and spiritual development. He and Nebu traveled frequently, consulting with leaders in other regions who wanted to establish similar institutions. But through all the public recognition and professional success, the core of their happiness remained their private relationship. Their bond had only deepened over the years, growing from initial attraction and protection into something profound and unbreakable. "Do you ever miss the simple life?" Nebu asked one evening as they sat on their private balcony, watching the sun set over the Nile. "When it was just the two of us, before all the public responsibilities?" Darius considered the question seriously. "Sometimes," he admitted, "there are moments when I miss the privacy, the ability to just be ourselves without thinking about what it means to others. But I don't regret the path we've chosen." "Neither do I," Nebu said, reaching over to take his hand. "Though I do appreciate moments like this, when it's just us again." They sat in comfortable silence, fingers intertwined, their bond humming with contentment and deep love. Around them, The palace continued its ancient rhythms, but their small corner of it remained a sanctuary of peace and happiness. As the stars emerged in the darkening sky, Darius reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From a frightened young scribe hiding his true nature to a confident advocate for social change. From a lonely guard captain devoted only to duty to a man who had learned the transformative power of love. They had both become more than they had ever imagined possible. "I love you," Darius said quietly, the words as meaningful now as they had been the first time he'd spoken them. "And I love you," Nebu replied, bringing their joined hands to his lips. "Always and forever." In the distance, the Great Pyramids stood silhouetted against the star-filled sky, eternal monuments to human ambition and achievement. But here on their balcony, Darius and Nebu had created something equally enduring, a love that had transformed not just their own lives, but the lives of countless others who had found hope and inspiration in their example. The future stretched before them, full of possibilities and challenges they would face together. Whatever came, they would meet it as they had everything else, with courage, with love, and with the unbreakable bond that connected their souls across all the obstacles the world might place in their path. As the night deepened around them, they remained on the balcony, talking quietly about their plans for the school, their hopes for the students, their dreams for a better future. And in their voices, in their gentle laughter, in the way they leaned into each other's warmth, was the proof that love could indeed change the world. One heart, one life, one courageous choice at a time. Years passed, and their love story became legend throughout Egypt and beyond. Students at the school learned about the scribe and the guard captain who had dared to challenge social conventions, who had turned their personal happiness into a force for positive change. Their writings were copied and distributed throughout the ancient world, carrying their message of equality and acceptance to places they would never see. But for Darius and Nebu themselves, the greatest reward was not the public recognition or the historical legacy. It was the quiet moments they continued to share, the daily choice to honor and cherish the bond between them, the knowledge that they had found in each other something precious beyond all measure. In the end, their story was both extraordinary and beautifully simple. Two souls who had recognized each other across the barriers of convention and circumstance, who had chosen love over fear, who had used that love to light the way for others walking similar paths. It was a story written in the stars and carved in stone, but most importantly, it was written in the hearts of all who heard it and dared to believe that love could indeed conquer all. But their story was far from over. As the school entered its 5th year of operation, new challenges arose that would test not only their relationship, but their commitment to the ideals they had fought so hard to establish. Word had reached them of unrest in the eastern provinces, where traditional factions were gaining power and rolling back many of the progressive reforms that had been implemented throughout the kingdom. "They're closing the regional schools," Julius reported during one of his visits, his usually composed demeanor showing signs of strain. 3 facilities in the past month, all under the pretense of financial constraints. But the real reason is political pressure from conservative nobles who see our work as a threat to their traditional authority. Darius felt a chill of fear that had nothing to do with the evening air. What about the students? The young Omegas who were depending on those schools. Some have been relocated to other facilities, but many have simply been sent home. Back to families and communities that may not accept them, back to situations they were trying to escape. Julius's expression was grim. "We're receiving desperate letters daily. Young people begging for help, for sanctuary, for any way to continue their education." That night, Darius paced their private chambers like a caged animal, his mind racing with possible solutions and his heart breaking for the students who were suffering because of political machinations beyond their control. "We can't abandon them," he said to Nebu, who was watching his agitated movements with concern. "These young people trusted us, believed in the future we promised them. We can't let political cowardice destroy their hopes." "What are you proposing?" Nebu asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. "We expand the main school, double the capacity, triple it if necessary. We bring every displaced student here to Memphis, where they'll be under the direct protection of the Pharaoh and beyond the reach of provincial politics." Nebu was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. That would require enormous resources. The current facility couldn't handle that many students. We'd need new buildings, more teachers, expanded dormitories, increased funding for food and supplies. Then we'll find a way to get those resources, Darius said with fierce determination. We'll petition the Pharaoh, appeal to our supporters, organize fundraising campaigns, whatever it takes. And if the conservative factions see our expansion as a provocation, if they decide to make us the focus of their opposition to the Pharaoh's progressive policies. Darius stopped pacing and turned to face his bonded mate. Then we'll face that challenge together, just as we've faced everything else. But I won't abandon those young people. I can't. The conversation that followed lasted until dawn, covering every aspect of what would be a massive undertaking. But by the time the sun rose over the Nile, they had committed themselves to the most ambitious project of their lives. The campaign to expand the school became a kingdom-wide effort that revealed both the depth of support for their cause and the strength of the opposition they faced. Wealthy merchants and progressive nobles contributed generously, moved by stories of displaced students and the promise of a more inclusive society. But for every voice raised in support, there seemed to be another condemning their efforts as dangerous radicalism. You're playing with forces beyond your understanding, Lord Amenhotep warned during a particularly heated public debate. This obsession with elevating the unnatural will bring disaster upon our kingdom. The gods established natural hierarchies for a reason. The gods also established love and compassion, Darius replied, his voice carrying clearly across the assembly hall. If we ignore those divine gifts in favor of rigid hierarchies, then we diminish ourselves and dishonor the gods we claim to serve. The debate that followed was intense and often personal, with Darius finding himself defending not just his policies but his very right to speak on such matters. Some questioned his authority as a common-born Omega to challenge ancient traditions. Others suggested that his relationship with Nebu had given him delusions of grandeur beyond his station. But there were also powerful voices raised in his defense. The high priest of Ra spoke eloquently about the spiritual dimensions of their work, framing it as a fulfillment of divine will rather than a challenge to it. Several military commanders, colleagues of Nebu's, testified to the guard captain's unwavering loyalty and competence. Most importantly, the Pharaoh himself attended the debate and made his position clear with a brief but decisive statement. We have heard much talk of tradition and hierarchy, the Pharaoh said, his voice commanding immediate silence. But the greatest tradition of Egypt has always been our willingness to adapt, to grow, to become better than we were. Those who cling too tightly to the past will find themselves buried beneath the sands of history. The royal endorsement effectively ended organized opposition to the expansion, but it also raised the stakes considerably. Their project was now not just an educational initiative, but a symbol of the Pharaoh's vision for the future of Egypt. Success would validate progressive policies throughout the kingdom. Failure would provide ammunition for conservative factions seeking to roll back decades of social progress. No pressure, Nebu said wryly as they reviewed the architectural plans for the new facilities. Only the future of social justice in Egypt, Darius replied with dark humor. What could possibly go wrong? The construction phase was a logistical nightmare that tested every skill they had developed over years of managing complex projects. The site they had chosen was adjacent to the original school, but the terrain was challenging and the timeline aggressive. They needed to complete the expansion before the next academic year began, which gave them less than 8 months to accomplish what would normally take twice as long. But they had advantages that typical construction projects lacked. The students themselves volunteered countless hours of labor, eager to help build the facilities that would house their displaced peers. Skilled craftsmen donated their services, inspired by the project's humanitarian goals. Even some of the conservative nobles who had opposed the expansion found themselves quietly contributing materials or expertise, unwilling to be seen as obstacles to a project that had gained such widespread support. Darius found himself working 18-hour days, coordinating everything from supply deliveries to teacher recruitment. His scholarly background proved invaluable in organizing the complex logistics, while his public speaking skills helped maintain enthusiasm among the hundreds of volunteers. But it was his bond with Nebu that kept him grounded during the most stressful periods. "You're pushing yourself too hard," Nebu said one evening as he found Darius collapsed over his desk, surrounded by scrolls and documents. "You haven't eaten properly in days, and you're barely sleeping." "There's too much to do," Darius mumbled, not lifting his head from the papyrus he had been reviewing. "The dormitory foundations are behind schedule. We're still short 3 teachers for the advanced classes, and the funding for the new library hasn't been confirmed." Nebu gently but firmly pulled him away from the desk and guided him to their bed. "And none of those problems will be solved if you work yourself into exhaustion. You need rest, proper food, and perspective." As Nebu massaged the tension from his shoulders, Darius felt some of the overwhelming pressure begin to ease. Through their bond, he could feel his mate's steady confidence, his unwavering belief that they would find solutions to every challenge. "How do you stay so calm?" Darius asked. "Doesn't any of this worry you?" "Of course it worries me," Nebu replied, his hands working at a particularly tight knot of muscle. "But panic and exhaustion won't help anyone. We've faced impossible challenges before and found ways to overcome them. This is no different. This feels different. The scale of it, the political implications, the number of lives depending on us getting it right. Which is exactly why we need to approach it systematically, one problem at a time, instead of trying to solve everything simultaneously." Nebu's voice was patient but firm. "Tomorrow we'll tackle the dormitory delays. The day after we'll address the teacher shortage. And we'll keep working through the list until everything is resolved." The systematic approach proved effective, though it required a level of delegation that Darius initially found difficult. He had become accustomed to personally overseeing every aspect of the school's operations, but the expanded facility required a more complex administrative structure. Katie, now a confident young man of 23, proved invaluable in managing the day-to-day operations of the original school while Darius focused on the expansion. Several of the earliest graduates returned to serve as teachers and administrators, creating a sense of continuity and shared mission that strengthened the entire institution. "Look at what you've built," Julu said during one of his increasingly frequent visits. "Not just buildings and programs, but a community. These people aren't just working for you. They're working with you toward a shared vision." It was true. The school had evolved into something larger than an educational institution. It had become a center of social innovation, a proving ground for ideas about equality and inclusion that were being watched and emulated throughout the known world. The expansion was completed just days before the arrival of the first displaced students. The new dormitories were simple but comfortable, the classrooms equipped with the latest educational materials, the common areas designed to foster community and collaboration. But it was the moment when the first group of refugees arrived that truly tested everything they had built. These weren't the carefully selected applicants of previous years, young people whose families supported their education and who came with some degree of preparation. These were survivors, young Omegas who had been cast out, abandoned, or forced to flee dangerous situations. Some of them have never had formal education, the teacher coordinating their arrival reported to Darius. Others are traumatized by their experiences. A few are barely past their presentation and don't even fully understand their own nature yet. Darius felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a physical burden. These young people had suffered because of the political battles he had helped to provoke. Their displacement was, in part, a consequence of the visibility and controversy his work had generated. "We'll help them," he said simply. "Whatever they need, whatever it takes, we'll find a way to provide it." The integration process was more challenging than anyone had anticipated. The new students struggled not just academically but emotionally, many carrying trauma that affected their ability to trust or form connections. Some were hostile, convinced that any kindness was a trap. Others were so desperate for acceptance that they became clingy and dependent. But gradually, with patience and skillful guidance from the expanded faculty, the new community began to take shape. Older students mentored newer ones, sharing not just academic knowledge but practical wisdom about navigating life as an Omega in a complex world. Teachers developed innovative approaches to education that addressed both intellectual and emotional needs. "It's remarkable," Nebu observed one evening as they walked through the campus after sunset. 6 months ago, this place was a construction site. Now it's home to over 300 young people who might otherwise have had nowhere to go. They paused to watch a group of students gathered around a fountain in one of the courtyards, engaged in animated discussion about a philosophy text they had been studying. The scene was peaceful and normal, but Darius knew the stories behind each of those young faces, tales of rejection, abandonment, and survival that would have broken many adults. "They're stronger than they know," he said quietly. "All of them. They've survived things that would have destroyed lesser spirits, and now they're building new lives for themselves. Just like their teacher did," Nebu observed, slipping an arm around Darius's waist. "You see yourself in them, don't you?" "How can I not? I was just as lost when I first arrived at the palace, just as uncertain about my place in the world. The only difference was that I was lucky enough to find protection and guidance." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Nebu said firmly. "You found your way because of your courage, your intelligence, your refusal to accept that you were less valuable than anyone else. And now you're helping others find that same strength." The success of the expanded school brought new opportunities and new challenges. Delegations from other kingdoms sent representatives to study their methods and potentially establish similar institutions. Scholars and philosophers requested audiences to discuss the theoretical foundations of their approach to education and social integration. But with increased visibility came increased scrutiny. Conservative factions that had been temporarily silenced by the Pharaoh's support began organizing more sophisticated opposition. Instead of direct confrontation, they pursued a strategy of gradual undermining, questioning the school's methods, spreading rumors about improper relationships between teachers and students, suggesting that the institution was becoming a hotbed of political radicalism. "They're being more subtle now," Julius warned during one of his briefings. "Instead of attacking the school directly, they're attacking its reputation. Whispering campaigns, anonymous accusations, carefully placed doubts about the character and motivations of its leadership." "What kind of accusations?" Darius asked, though he suspected he already knew. "The usual ones directed at Omega-led institutions. That you're using your position to seduce vulnerable young men. That the bond between you and Nebu is somehow corrupting the students. That the school is really a cover for inappropriate activities." The accusations were predictable but no less painful for their familiarity. Darius had faced similar whispers throughout his public career, but knowing that they now potentially affected the welfare of his students made them cut deeper than ever before. "We need to be completely transparent," he said after discussing the situation with Nebu. "Every aspect of the school's operations, every policy and procedure, every relationship between staff and students. We can't give them any opening to exploit. The measures they implemented were comprehensive and sometimes burdensome. All interactions between teachers and students were documented. Counseling sessions required witnesses or detailed records. Social activities were carefully supervised and regulated. The policies were necessary, but they also changed the atmosphere of the school, introducing an element of formality and suspicion that had never existed before." "I hate this," Darius confided to Nebu one evening as they reviewed the latest batch of compliance reports. "We're treating our own people like potential criminals, documenting every conversation as if it might be used as evidence against us." "It's temporary," Nebu assured him, though his own frustration was evident. "Once we establish a clear record of proper conduct, once the political situation stabilizes, we can relax some of these measures." But the political situation showed no signs of stabilizing. If anything, the opposition was becoming more organized and more determined. Reports reached them of similar institutions in other regions facing increased harassment, with some being forced to close or dramatically reduce their operations. "They're coordinating their efforts," Julius reported during an emergency meeting. "What we're seeing isn't random local opposition. There's a kingdom-wide campaign being orchestrated by someone with significant resources and influence. Any idea who's behind it?"
Suspicions.
"But no proof. Lord Amenhotep is certainly involved, but he's not clever enough to organize something this sophisticated. There are suggestions that foreign influences might be involved, kingdoms that see Egypt's progressive policies as a threat to their own traditional structures. The idea that their work might be considered a threat by foreign powers was both flattering and terrifying. It suggested that their impact was being felt far beyond Egypt's borders, but it also meant they were facing opposition with resources and motivation they had never imagined. "What do we do?" Darius asked. "We continue doing what we've always done," Nebu said firmly. "We protect our students, we maintain our standards, and we trust that truth and justice will ultimately prevail. And if they don't, then we fight harder." The crisis came to a head during the school's sixth-year celebration, an annual event that had become a showcase for the institution's achievements and a gathering point for supporters throughout the kingdom. This year's celebration was particularly significant, as it marked the graduation of the first class of students who had completed their entire education at the expanded facility. The ceremony was held in the school's main courtyard, with hundreds of guests including government officials, religious leaders, and families of the graduating students. Darius's speech focused on the achievements of the graduates and their potential to contribute to Egyptian society, but underneath his words was an awareness that this might be one of the last opportunities to demonstrate the school's value to its critics. The trouble began during the reception following the ceremony. A group of men wearing the robes of minor priests approached several of the younger students with what appeared to be casual conversation but quickly became aggressive questioning about their relationships with teachers and their experiences at the school. "Are you comfortable here?" one of the men asked a 17-year-old student named Senab. "Do the teachers ever ask you to do things that make you uncomfortable? Do they ever touch you inappropriately or make you feel like you owe them special favors?" Senab, who had been traumatized by abuse before coming to the school, became visibly distressed by the questions. When he tried to walk away, the men followed him, pressing their interrogation and drawing attention from other guests. It was Katie who intervened, stepping between Senab and his questioners with quiet authority. "I think you've upset him enough," he said calmly. "Perhaps it would be better if you directed your questions to the administration rather than harassing our students. We're conducting a legitimate inquiry into serious allegations," one of the priests replied. "These young men have a right to speak freely about their experiences. They also have a right not to be bullied and intimidated at their own graduation ceremony," Katie shot back. "If you have concerns about the school's operations, there are proper channels for addressing them." The confrontation quickly escalated, with other students and faculty gathering around to support Katie, while the priests became more aggressive in their questioning. It was clear that this was not a spontaneous incident but a carefully planned provocation designed to create exactly the kind of public disturbance that would discredit the school. Darius arrived at the scene just as the argument was reaching a dangerous pitch. The sight of his students being harassed at what should have been a celebration of their achievements filled him with a cold fury that he struggled to contain. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard and commanding immediate attention, "I understand you have questions about our institution. I would be happy to address them at an appropriate time and place. However, this is a graduation ceremony for our students, and I will not allow them to be subjected to harassment on what should be one of the proudest days of their lives. We have every right to investigate reports of improper conduct," one of the priests declared loudly, clearly playing to the crowd of onlookers. "The people of Egypt deserve to know what really goes on behind these walls." "Indeed they do," Darius agreed, "which is why we maintain detailed records of all our activities, submit regular reports to the appropriate authorities, and welcome legitimate inquiries conducted through proper channels. What I will not tolerate is the intimidation of our students by individuals who seem more interested in creating a spectacle than in discovering the truth." The priest's response was interrupted by a new voice, one that immediately commanded respectful attention from everyone present. "Perhaps I can help clarify the situation." The Pharaoh himself had arrived at the reception, accompanied by a small retinue of guards and officials. His presence transformed the dynamics of the confrontation instantly. "Divine One," the priests said in unison, dropping to their knees in recognition of royal authority. "Rise," the Pharaoh commanded, his tone neutral but carrying unmistakable authority. "I understand there are questions being raised about the conduct of this institution and its staff. As it happens, I have been conducting my own investigation into these matters. Darius felt his heart stop. Had they lost the Pharaoh's support? Had the whispering campaign finally succeeded in undermining their patron's confidence? For the past 6 months, the Pharaoh continued, my personal investigators have been conducting a thorough review of the school's operations, interviewing current and former students, examining records, and observing classes and activities. I wanted to be absolutely certain that the trust one have placed in this institution and its leadership was justified. The courtyard fell completely silent, everyone waiting for the verdict that would determine the school's future. The investigation has concluded that the allegations of improper conduct are entirely without merit, the Pharaoh announced. The school's operations meet the highest standards of educational and ethical excellence. The students are well cared for, properly educated, and treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. Relief flooded through Darius, but the Pharaoh wasn't finished. Furthermore, the investigation has revealed that the sources of these allegations appear to be individuals and organizations with political motivations rather than genuine concerns for student welfare. Some of these sources have connections to foreign entities that have been actively working to undermine Egypt's progressive policies. The implications of the Pharaoh's words rippled through the crowd like shock waves. What they had been facing wasn't just domestic political opposition but foreign interference in Egypt's internal affairs. Therefore, the Pharaoh concluded, I am not only reaffirming my support for this institution and its mission, but I am also directing the appropriate authorities to investigate those who have been spreading false allegations for political purposes. Egypt will not tolerate foreign manipulation of our domestic policies. The ceremony concluded without further incident, but the implications of what had been revealed continued to reverberate in the days that followed. Several of the priests who had been questioning students were arrested and charged with seditious activity. Documents seized in related raids revealed the extent of the foreign conspiracy to undermine Egypt's social progress. We were pawns in a much larger game than we realized, Julius explained as he briefed Darius and Nebu on the investigation's findings. The attacks on your school were part of a broader effort to destabilize the Pharaoh's government and roll back policies that other kingdoms saw as threats to their own traditional structures. But why target us specifically? Darius asked. Because you represent something that terrifies traditional power structures, the idea that merit and character matter more than birth and social position. If a common-born Omega can achieve influence and respect, if institutions like your school can successfully challenge social hierarchies, then similar movements might emerge elsewhere. The revelation that their work had international significance was both validating and sobering. They had succeeded in creating something that was seen as genuinely threatening to established power structures, but that success had also made them permanent targets for those who opposed social progress. What does this mean for the future? Nebu asked. It means we continue our work, but with the understanding that we're part of a larger struggle, Darius replied. The students who graduate from here will carry our ideas into the wider world. They'll become teachers, administrators, advisors to nobles and officials. They'll marry and raise children who grow up believing that everyone deserves respect and opportunity regardless of their birth or nature. A generational change, Julius observed. Slower than political revolution, but ultimately more permanent. The school's vindication by the Pharaoh's investigation marked the beginning of a new phase in its development. With the threat of political interference diminished, they could focus more on educational innovation and less on defensive measures. The oppressive documentation requirements were relaxed, allowing for more natural interactions between faculty and students. More importantly, the publicity surrounding the investigation had actually increased support for their work. Donations poured in from individuals who had been inspired by the story of the school's resilience in the face of false accusations. Several wealthy merchants established endowments to ensure the institution's long-term financial stability. Look at this, Darius said to Nebu one morning as he reviewed the latest batch of correspondence. Application letters from young people throughout the known world. We have requests from as far away as Nubia and the Mesopotamian kingdoms. That's wonderful, but we can't possibly accommodate everyone who wants to attend. No, but we can help establish sister institutions in other regions. Train teachers, develop curricula, provide guidance and support for local leaders who want to create similar programs. The idea of franchising their educational model had been discussed before, but the foreign conspiracy had made it seem too dangerous to pursue. Now, with that threat neutralized and their methods vindicated, it became not just possible but necessary. Over the following years, the Memphis School became the center of an international network of educational institutions dedicated to serving marginalized populations. Each new school was adapted to local conditions and cultures, but all shared the core principles of equality, respect, and opportunity that Darius and Nebu had established. "We're changing the world," Nebu observed one evening as they reviewed reports from the various partner institutions. "We're helping others change their own corners of the world," Darius corrected. "That's even better." Their personal relationship continued to serve as the foundation for all their public work. The bond between them had only deepened over the years, strengthened by shared challenges and mutual support through difficult times. They had learned to balance their individual strengths and compensate for each other's weaknesses, creating a partnership that was both personally fulfilling and professionally effective. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't found you in that corridor that night?" Nebu asked during one of their quiet evening conversations. "You would have found me eventually," Darius replied with confidence. "Our souls were meant to be together. If not that night, then some other time, some other way." "You're that certain?" "I am. What we have isn't just romantic love or physical attraction, though it includes both of those things. It's a recognition of something fundamental, a completion that neither of us could achieve alone." As they entered their 15th year together, their story had become legend throughout Egypt and beyond. Young Omegas learned about the scribe who had refused to accept limitations, who had used his intelligence and courage to create opportunities for others like himself. Young Alphas learned about the guard captain who had chosen love over convention, who had used his strength to protect rather than dominate. But perhaps most importantly, their story had become a symbol of possibility for anyone who felt marginalized or powerless. They had proven that two people who truly loved each other could not only overcome personal obstacles but could change the world around them for the better. "What do you want your legacy to be?" a visiting scholar asked Darius during an interview for a historical chronicle he was preparing. Darius considered the question carefully. "I want people to remember that everyone has value, regardless of their birth or their nature. I want them to know that love is stronger than prejudice, that cooperation achieves more than domination, that treating others with dignity and respect isn't just morally right, it's practically effective." "And you, Captain Nebu?" the scholar asked. "I want people to understand that true strength comes from protecting others, not from imposing your will upon them," Nebu replied. "That the greatest victories are won not through violence but through patience, wisdom, and unwavering commitment to what is right." The scholar recorded their words carefully, knowing that he was documenting not just their personal stories but a pivotal moment in the social evolution of their civilization. Future generations would look back on this period as the time when ancient hierarchies began to give way to more inclusive and equitable systems of organization. As the sun set over the Nile on another day in their extraordinary life together, Darius and Nebu stood on their private balcony, looking out over the school campus where hundreds of young people were pursuing their dreams with courage and determination. "Thank you," Darius said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me when I thought I was invisible. For protecting me when I was vulnerable. For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. For loving me enough to change the world." "Thank you," Nebu replied. "For trusting me with your heart. For showing me that strength and gentleness can coexist. For teaching me that the most important battles are fought not with swords but with compassion and wisdom." In the distance, the ancient pyramids stood silhouetted against the star-filled sky, monuments to pharaohs who had ruled through power and fear. But here in their small corner of Memphis, Darius and Nebu had built something far more enduring, a legacy of love that would inspire countless generations to come, proving once and for all that two hearts united in purpose could indeed move mountains and change the course of history itself.